Okay, Psalm 144. Psalm 144. I think we've been in the Psalms now for the better part of 3 years, and it's been a real blessing to me to go through the Psalms one by one. And we see in Psalm 144 now, it's after these last 4 Psalms where I call them the help Psalms, Lord help me, or Lord give ear to my voice, all these different things. Now we see it's kind of refreshing because he's coming out of it. In the arrangement, not necessarily time-wise as far as chronological in David's age, but in the situation of whoever arranged these Psalms, we see now that he is this Psalm is going to be the last of 10 Psalms that were accredited to David. And we see that the last 4, 40, 41, 40, 39, 40, 41, and 40, 40 through 43 anyway, we see that they were Psalms that, what we call the help Psalms. Lord, listen to me, give ear to my voice. With my voice I pray, and, so forth. Help me speedily. But now we see that David, many people believe this Psalm was written possibly after a period where David had gotten through the struggles that he had with Saul, and now he's on the throne, and he sees victories, but yet at the same time, David had to not only unite the country together, because remember it was split apart by Saul, and then David came changing tribes as far as the king was concerned. And then on the top of that, you still had all those surrounding enemies, and you had all those people that were trying to destroy Israel. From north to east to south and southwest, they were always trying to push Israel out of the promised land. Nothing new under the sun, is there? That's what we see today. And so David now he's still faced with the task of, excuse me, you got it? Okay, faced with the task of uniting the nation. And yet you can imagine what it must have been like to now have to deal with both internal and external problems. And yet what he has seen if he started at 17, whenever he was anointed by by Samuel, and then we see he's probably right around 30. So this has been about a 13-year trek in his life before he gets the United Kingdom, and now with all the weaknesses, he's got to build it into a substantial nation, which he does within his lifetime, and hands it off to his son, who has the glory days, and of course we know that was Solomon. But as we look at this, we see that this is a psalm that finally brings us out of the jail, out of the prison that he talked about, and he sees the light at the end of the tunnel. He's still surrounded, but he also looks back and sees how that, yes, God did make him king. And now he's the king. And he had to go through all kinds of trials, but he sees a lot more going on. But he's got the confidence of knowing that it was grace that led me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. And so we see now in Psalm 144, then, blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands to war and my fingers for battle, my loving kindness and my fortress, my high tower and my deliverer, my shield and the one in whom I take refuge, who subdues my people under me. Lord, what is man that you take knowledge of him, or the son of man that you are mindful of him? Man is like a breath. His days are like the passing shadow. Bow down your heavens, O Lord, and come down. Touch the mountains, and they shall smoke. Flash forth lightning and scatter them. Shoot out arrows and destroy them. Stretch out your hand from above. Rescue me and deliver me out of the great waters, from the hand of foreigners, whose mouth speaks lying words, and whose right hand is the right hand of falsehood. I will sing a new song to you, O God. On a harp of 10 strings I will sing praises to you, the one who gives salvation to kings, who delivers David, his servant, from the deadly sword. Rescue me and deliver me from the hand of the foreigners, whose mouth speak lying words and whose right hand is a right hand of falsehood, that our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth, that our daughters may be as pillars sculptured in a palace or in palace style, that our barns may be full, supplying all kinds of produce, that our sheep may bring forth thousands and tens of thousands in our fields, that our oxen may be well laden, that there may be no breaking in or going out, that there be no outcry in the streets. Happy are the people who are in such a state. Happy are the people whose God is the Lord. And so now we see that he is now talking about success belongs to God. We see that his deliverance and the victories that he has, it's going to be because of the power of God. And we see also that the future generations and the blessings that are the victories that they have today are going to affect not only his life, but future generations. And that's what that's what most countries, whenever they're looking forward to the future, they're not looking only for themselves. They're looking forward to our posterity, both to ourselves and to our posterity. We want our kids to have it a little bit better than we had. And this is the natural instinct of a productive and a prospering society. A society that is narcissistic is saying, I want it and I want it now, and it really doesn't matter. In fact, I don't even want any kids. Kids are a drain. Does that sound familiar today? And so we see that with all that, we see that we have major problems. And families are being destroyed. And children, I saw something where these hospitals, there's something like 1,300 kids, and something like $125 million that has been made from these hospitals, which should know better, on mutilating children to make them girls or boys or whatever, to change their orientation. And how sad that is to see that we have nutcases as leaders and even doctors today that should know better. And then, of course, if we don't reproduce ourselves, then we got to bring in people from different lands with whole different customs and cultures and everything else. And so basically our families are disintegrating, and then our country disintegrates. And so it's not, immigration is a great thing, but when it's just to fill up our cities so that we don't lose our voting power, then we got problems. And so we see that David is saying, blessed is my rock. Now, of course, in the King James, I think it says my strength. So he's the Lord, my strength. Well, that either way, it's my rock, which is stability, strength, which is, of course, the idea of a rock, but it could be translated either way. But he is saying, any success that I have is a result of God's grace in the first four verses. And we see, blessed is the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war. David was the warrior king. From the time he was a teenager, and even before, he fought lions and bears. But his life was characterized by war. In fact, when he finally had a short respite after uniting the kingdom and taking care of the surrounding enemies just for a few months or maybe a couple of years, his great desire was not only to build Jerusalem, and which he did, but the Lord stopped him when he wanted to build the temple. Remember, that was his great desire all the way through the Psalms, that we could build the house of the Lord. And he went to Nathan back in 2 Samuel chapter 7. And he said, and so he said, I want a word from the Lord. And Nathan, the prophet, at first said, go ahead. But then the Lord stopped Nathan, and of course there's that prophet-king relationship. It's the law and the prophets. The prophets were always the power behind the throne, and they were recognized as the law. The Old Testament was recognized as the law and the prophets, not the law and the kings, because it's a spiritual book. And so we see that Nathan came back to David, and said, no, the Lord told you you can't, but he's going to make a covenant with you that the Messiah is going to come through you, and that through you all the nations are going to be blessed, which takes us from the Abrahamic covenant to the Davidic covenant. Because Abraham, it was the people. Now we have the direct line, the descendants of David. A direct descendant of David would come to be the Messiah. And of course, that's why we start the New Testament off with a genealogy. Because we see that the Lord, it begins with the genealogy, the promise to David, that this would happen. And then it goes back to Abraham, of course. But we see then that he says, the Lord is my strength. He's the source of my strength. He's my rock. And actually, Psalm 144 and Psalm 18 coincide. In fact, David borrows a lot of the phraseology from Psalm 18 for Psalm 144. And some people think that David actually didn't write Psalm 144, but that it was a kind of a compilation of other phrases that David had. But yet it says, it's a Psalm of David. And there again, we get into those superscriptions. Are those inspired or not? And that's always a big debate. But since they're there, we use them, okay? It's a Psalm of David. And this is the last, or one of the last of the 10 Psalms now. We'll get up through 146 of these Psalms that David writes about his kingship and so forth. But the great thing about it is that he's now coming out of the darkness into the light, and he's really praising the Lord. And he says, in Psalm 118, he uses the same terminology. Knows my hands for war. And we think of our hands as power, as strength, the hand of the Lord and so forth. We think of strategy. Well, how am I going to do this? Okay, I'm a man of war, so how do I take the war to the people? What's my strategy? What are my plans? My fingers. Now we're getting into the details. And so how do I do it? And of course, that's going to be more of your tactics. Are we going to use chariots? Are we going to use, how we're going to do this? The Philistines have kept us from building swords and so forth, and implements of war. So what are our tactics, and how do I train people to even use a sword? And so he's got a lot of things he's got to come up with. And then, of course, how do we teach them battlefield maneuvers, which are tactics? And so I've got, not only has God made me the warrior king, but now I've got to train a nation in order to fight. Now, of course, they had their relay, as we saw back in 1 Samuel, where they still could blow the trumpets throughout the land and raise an army. And they had enough plowshares that they could beat into swords and so forth. But they still weren't a professional army that could fend off others like came about at the end of David's reign. And by the time Solomon comes around, nobody wanted to bother them. I mean, they were too strong and too rich. And so that was the heyday. That was the zenith of Israel's history. And so we see that, Psalm 18, verses 1 and 2 says, I love you, Lord, my strength, or my rock. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. Notice all the terms that he's using there. And you see right there in verse 2, he's my loving kindness. Now, in the King James, it says goodness. There's that word hesed again. That beautiful word of God's mercy, his loyal love, that he'll never leave you or forsake you, that he remembers his mercy, not that he's not only withholding his wrath, but he loves you in spite of what you've done. And like a mother's love, like a father's love, where yes, you may be displeased, but you are his children. And as a result, he'll never let you go. And so this loving kindness, your loving kindness, you're my fortress. What do you think of when you think of a fortress? Again, your safe place of safety. My high tower, that's the highest point and the highest, safest place in that fortress. And my deliverer, my shield, and the one in whom I take refuge. So he's my refuge, who subdues my people under me. So we see that David right now is attributing that everything that he's done and all the success he's had is because of God's grace. And so I like what back when Napoleon, someone was recommending a leader to him as a general. And he said that this man has fought in many battles and he's got great credentials. And Napoleon said, yes, but is he lucky? Because Napoleon, when he, even as brilliant as a tactician that he was, he realized that a lot of times battles turned on things that were out of his control. The confusion of war, the confusion of battle. And he realized at times, now later on he came to the point where he realized that God controlled everything. When he was on the island of Helena, I think he may have been saved then, because he looked back on history and it's recorded, or that he said, you know, we've had great kings and so forth, but the supreme king, the one that's last forever, is Jesus Christ. And so I hope that, I hope I'll see Napoleon in heaven. I don't want to see anybody in hell. But there again, I don't know. And then again, a lot of people would hate Napoleon. So, I don't want to get into anything political. But I'm not willing that any should perish if God isn't. Are you? So there again, I don't know who is. That's God's judge, God in his judgment. But it is God. Notice he says, my. I belong to him. And he is mine. And I am his. So he's my high tower. But then notice he says, even with his people, God gave him certain people. We looked at the mighty men. God brought mighty men, or people that became mighty men. They were just a bunch of vagabonds that were running from Saul themselves. And they united with them, and God molded those 400 men into a mighty army. And he said, I didn't do that. God gave them a heart to want to follow me. Why? As a pastor, I look at it and I say, why is it that people want to come and listen to me? Why do something, there again, whatever I have is because God has done it. And of course, we can go out and try to win friends and influence enemies and so forth. We'll do that all we can. But in the end, it's God who brings us together, isn't it? And so the same way in your family, same way in whatever stature you have, and other people that love you is because God gave them a heart to love you. And I don't deserve it. I don't deserve for 4 kids all over the country to call me and wish me happy birthday and talk to me. I don't deserve grandkids, that want to talk to me about the latest, what was the name of that book they were reading? Oh, they're reading The Hobbit. I don't know why my youngest son is reading The Hobbit to 6-year-old kids. And so, but there again, he's reading it to I won't get into all that. But, but they want to tell me all about it, and then they want to find, what was it that they were wanting me to tell them about? Oh, hurricanes. Oh, Grandpa's been through a lot of hurricanes, so tell us about a hurricane. And so, but why do I get that blessing? Whatever God does, it's because he loves me. And so whatever people who want to even sit around and have a cup of coffee with me, it's nothing that I've done other than try to be as friendly as I can. But God is the one who unites our hearts together, isn't it? And so David is saying, I realize that, especially since these guys saw me through thick and thin, and they still like me. They saw me crying at times. They saw me with big, big problems. And sometimes I led them astray. And yet, they still are following me. And so he says, these men, and these other people, you've subdued them under me. And you've told me I'm going to be king, but you had to tell a lot of other people that I was going to be king. And so you've done that. And so he says, you've taught my fingers you taught me the tactics and so forth. But now, Lord, you've given me people to follow me. You've given me everything. You're my goodness, my fortress. But notice the verses 3 and 4. He says, this is one of those great passages, O Lord, what is man that you take knowledge of him? Or the Son of Man that you are mindful of him? Okay, Lord, why would you, this great universe that you've made, and here we are on a tiny ball in just a tremendous Milky Way that we can't even understand, a solar system that is beyond our even going to the next planet. And yet, you, from all the expanses of space, you not only look down on this little ball, this terrestrial ball, as we sing the song, but you look down on this little guy like me. I think David wasn't head and shoulders in stature, in physical stature, like Saul was. David might not have been much to look at when he was younger. After all, his brothers put him down and everything else. But Lord, why would you pick a guy like me to lead this nation? So what am I? And why would you do it? In some way in our lives, Lord, why have you blessed me? And why have you put me in this position of privilege of being an American, of being a father or a mother? What has God done in our lives? And every good gift, every perfect gift comes down from you. So what am I? In all the universe, you chose a person like me. Out of all the billions of people in the world, you saved me. Why? Why are you mindful of me? And so David is looking at that, and it humbles him. But he says that also, he says, he says, man is but a breath. I've lived a short time, but, life is short. I'm realizing that, especially since I've been in battle. That's one thing about people who've been in combat. And one time they're sitting and they're talking to a fellow, and the next second that person is dead. Those are eerie feelings. That's, I've never been in combat, but I've talked to a lot of people who have. And that's, and then you talk about the aftermath of battles and just the battlefield, how horrible it is and everything. Why did you spare me? And so David realizes, he could die at any time. He has seen enough to realize that life is pretty short. But then he says also, my days, or his days, are like a passing shadow. So life is short, and days without the Lord are like, they're vain. What's a shadow? It's nothing. A vapor, as James says, it's like a vapor that disappears. And so we see that, Lord, what am I? And why are you doing this for me? And as a result, Lord, my day, I want to live forever, but life is pretty short. So I have a hard time with that idea of eternity. And so we see that David is pondering that. So then he turns it and he says, any victory that I have is a result of God's power. And so we see in verses 5 through 11, here we have a picture of David saying, Lord, show your power like you did on Mount Sinai. And notice the terms that he uses. Bow down your heavens, O Lord, come down, touch the mountains, that they shall smoke. Remember, that's what happened at Mount Sinai. Flash forth lightning and scatter them. Remember, Moses said, better make sure you don't have any animals, nothing around that mountain when God comes down. And he says, scatter them, shoot out your arrows and destroy them. Of course, he's talking about God's enemies. Stretch out your hand from above, rescue me and deliver me out of the great waters. So he says, Lord, show the power like you did at Mount Sinai. And to us, we say, Lord, show your power like you did at the cross, that I may know you and the power of your resurrection. Remember what Paul prayed, Philippians 3:10, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection. I want to see what you can do, not only through in my life, but what, Lord, the greatest miracle in all the world after creation was the recreation of life through the shed blood of Jesus Christ and his resurrection. And so, Lord, I want to see that power. I want to see what you can do. And you broke the power of cancel sin. You set the prisoner free. And so, Lord, I want to see what you can do, but not only to me, but for my enemies. So David is using those terms, and I gave you some verses. Psalm 18, verses 8 and 9, he uses them repeatedly in the book of Psalms. And well, Psalm 18 has 4 or 5 verses there, 8 and 9, 14 through 17, verse 45, verse 50. All those he used, and it's kind of a repeat here in this psalm. And then he remembers God's dramatic appearance, and that was back in Exodus chapter 19, verses 18 through 25, and then chapter 20, 18 through 21. So then, as a result of Lord, heaven come down and take care of it. But then rescue me and deliver me out of the great waters. And how many times have we seen water used as a source of power? And we certainly see that in the pictures we see in North Carolina, don't we? I mean, there was a little town called Chimney Rock. And I remember back as a kid, I was talking about my older brother who is evacuated and now up in northern Florida. But we were talking about Chimney Rock. We remember that because we had a cousin who was older than us, about 10 years older, and he was an adult when we were kids. But he talked about his favorite place in North Carolina was Chimney Rock. Did you see a picture of Chimney Rock in the internet? I mean, the whole thing is just washed away. There's not a building standing. And you think about the power of water. And now, like it said, there's people drowned, they can't even find them from just the power of water. And now we're worrying about the storm surges down in Tampa Bay area. I mean, this is the idea of, and of course what David would remember in the Middle East were those wadis where they would be just barren land. And the next thing you know, from the water coming down from those hills and so forth without any warning, all of a sudden they were just full and overflowing and just sweep you right away. Remember Dominic, when he would tell us about, he was at a place where it really looked beautiful. It was flat land with kind of a valley or a big gully it looked like, but it looked like a canyon. And all of a sudden the bus driver said, everybody back in the bus. And so he said, hurry. And they were all getting back on the bus, and he said, we've got to get out of here because they've had a rain up in the mountains and water's coming down. Of course, now with satellites, you can tell all that today, but back in David's day, you couldn't. So if you were caught in one of those, you were swept away. And so it was a time of terror for you to be caught in one of those times, in one of those, as they called them, wadis, which would be the streams like that. And so we say, Lord, rescue me from the great waters. And so he says, we got a torrent. Even though you've made me king, Lord, I'm king, but look at what's going on around me. Now, I got to lead this nation. I got to unite it because look, I've got Syria up there. I've got Moab. I got the Philistines I've still got to fight. I got Egypt, up and down the way. Edom. These people don't like me, and they certainly don't like our country. Amorites and the Moabites and everybody else is coming after us. And can you imagine poor old Netanyahu over there today having to fight the Syrians and the people down in Gaza, and now the Jordanians and the Lebanese and everybody that's the river to the sea. And then you got the United States that is, you don't know whether they're going to help you or not from day to day. It's strange, isn't it? Then you've got people within his own country that say, hey, do everything you can to get the hostages back. Well, how do you do that? So with people, you can understand just how hard it would be to be a leader in Israel at any age or in any age. And so we see that David was in that position. But we say in Psalm 32, David had said in verse 6, he says, for this cause everyone who is godly shall pray to you in a time when you may be found. Surely in a flood of great waters they shall not come near him. So when the great waters come, when I feel like I'm knee deep or neck deep and being swept away, yet there's a God in heaven who will protect me. And so David is looking to that. And then we see in verses 8 and 11, that's that right hand of falsehood. That's another one of those poetic phrases. Whose mouth speak lying words, and whose right hand is a right hand of falsehood. And in verse 11, we see the same terminology. Whose right hand is a right hand of fault. And of course, the right hand is the power hand for most people. I'm left-handed, and 10% of the world is left-handed, but most everybody is right-handed. But the idea of the right hand is the position of power and the position of strength. And so he says, their strength is how good they can lie. Their strength is in their deceit, and they can destroy people. And of course, why? Because they are their father, the devil, who is a murderer and a liar from the beginning, a liar and a murderer. And the bad thing about evil people is the power of their words and how they can lie and distort the truth. He says, Lord, you're going to deliver me from these. And that's one of the things you find in the ministry, you find in life. You just can't stop people saying bad things about you. Many times you just have to outlive it or allow others to see that you are not, the misinformation or whatever that's out there about you. Now they got companies that will, if you pay them, they'll go through the internet and just see if there's anybody who's said anything bad about you. I've never had that. In the politics, they call it what? What is the term where they talk about raking up and the adversary when you're looking at other, what's that? Well, muckrakers, but it's the idea of you're looking for things on your enemy, on your opponent. And so, the word that would come up, opposition research. So, if I could find anything about that turkey, I'm going to make sure, and the sad thing about it, they'll go after your kids, they'll go after everybody to destroy you. And Satan's good at that. And if they can't find anything, they'll make up things, especially if they could overpower you with their power of information, with their platform, as we call it today. And so he says, Lord, I can't, I put up with that for 13 years with Saul. And now I still got people that are not with me in this kingdom. And then I got all those people out there that are trying to infiltrate. And a lot of these people are intermarried with the Moabites and the Syrians. And I don't know who to trust right now. You're going to help me build this nation. So politics is a strange and heartless place. Someone said that if you want a friend in Washington, D.C., get a dog. That's sad, but that's true. And so we see that David was feeling that. And yet, look, he was looking at the Lord. And he says, notice, I will sing a new song to you. So in all the middle of this, now we see that he's coming out of the prison. He says, okay, I'm going to quit worrying about all of it, and I'm going to get back to praising God. And I'm going to sing a new song. And despite all the dangers, I'm going to get back to praising you, singing and making melody in my heart to you. The one who gives victory, as we see in the verse there, in verse 9. And then in Psalm 33, he has already said, no king is saved by a multitude of an army. A mighty man is not delivered by his great strength. A horse is a vain hope for safety, neither shall it deliver any by its great strength. So safety comes from the Lord. So he says, I can have all these things, and I want an army, especially. I want to equip my army, but in the end, safety is from you. And so, Lord, you're going to be the one who's going to give us the victory. And so a man's not saved. And I realize as a king, my safety isn't in the people around me. My safety is in you. And so, a horse, a tank, an atom bomb, whatever you want to call it, is a vain thing in battle, because safety is from the Lord. And so we can trust in aircraft carriers, and one of the things that we keep seeing is, we got people, just send an aircraft carrier over there and whatever, and that'll calm things down, because one American aircraft carrier has more firepower than 3/4 of the countries in the world, and we got 12 of them. Boy, that makes us really secure, right? No, all you got to do is hit one of those things, you're going to kill 1,000 men. So, and if one of the things we've seen throughout history, Rome was one of them, I think it was called Adrianople, and other places where there was a certain battle that came along that all of a sudden the nation realized, hey, we might be losing. We might not have the strength we used to. And countries have those problems. Napoleon had his Russia, and then of course he had his Waterloo. And England had its Yorktown. And so you just see time after time. England had, again, they had their Dunkirk, and all these different things where we see, oh my, we didn't realize how weak we were. And so, again, safety is from the Lord. And folks, we want to pray for our country. We want to pray for our men in uniform and women in uniform, because we are just, it's up to God to keep us safe. And that's what David said. Yes, Lord, I'm going to do everything in my power, but I realize power comes to you. God said it once, he said it twice, that safety or power belongs to the Lord. And so we've seen that in the Psalms. So Lord, I'm trusting you. And so I'm going to sing a new song to you, one that gives me victory, like victory in Jesus. And Ron Hamilton, that great song that we love to sing, Rejoice in the Lord. Give thanks to the Lord, though your testing seems long. In darkness, he giveth a song. Have you ever had a song or God reminds you of a song when you're in deep distress? Those become precious psalms to you, or precious songs. Whenever you're in a time of turmoil and God brings you, and sometimes what's frustrating is you can't remember it all, but you can remember part of it. Then you got to come to church if you don't have a hymnal at home and find that song. And then all of a sudden that whole verse or that whole song, you'll never forget it. Isn't that great? My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, oh my soul. So we see that, just certain songs that come to mind. Prone to wonder, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, take and seal it, for thy courts above. And so, just certain songs that come to your mind after we've sung them over and over again. But God gives us a song. In darkness, he gives songs. Or a verse. And again, we've talked about verses that just turn you into a happy spell, or give you a happy spell that you never forget. So David's got a new song. Whatever it is, well, you don't know if it's an old song that all of a sudden came to light, and he said, I never thought about it that way, or if it was something that he composed. But unlike, Spurgeon wrote the Treasury of David back in the 1870s and 1880s, over almost 150 years ago. And notice what now, they had problems with music back then as we have today. There were those who said we shouldn't have any instruments in the church. And I have relatives that believe you shouldn't have any instruments in church. Then I've got friends and relatives that you go to their church and they'll blow out the back doors with their instruments. And so, I like what Spurgeon said. And this is back now, 150 years ago. Notice what he says. When music drowns the voice and artistic skill is a higher place than hearty singing, it is time that the instruments were banished from public worship. But when they are subordinate to the song, as here, it is not for us to prohibit them. In other words, there's a balance. So we want to sing, but the main thing that God hears is, yes, he will. And my wife plays an offertory or a special every service almost. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, especially if music sets the mood and gets us in the mood for the service. But the main thing is we want to know the songs. You're going to find me more. I'm going to say, let's sing that verse without the book. Let's get it in our minds so we are not dependent on the book. And then the one thing that Spurgeon's Tabernacle was known for was he didn't have a song leader. He would stand up in front of everybody, and he wasn't a good singer, but he would just open up and they would say that the voice that came, that just the people, the way they sang in those pews would nearly lift you out of the pews. Because, as Spurgeon said, the power isn't in the choir, the power is in the pew. Singing people. And so, yes, he had a choir, but at the same time, I don't know if he had a song leader there, but the main thing was you could sense it, not from the pulpit, but from the pew. The people sang from their hearts. And boy, would that, when you have that, that's like saying sick 'em to a bulldog to a preacher. They're ready to go. And so, again, Lord, he's given a new song in our hearts. And then very quickly, we see the last part is not only am I totally dependent on God's victory, but the victories I have with God will affect future generations. It will affect my kids. It will affect those around me. And so our children will inherit the blessings of God. Notice in verse 12, he says that our sons may be as plants. Remember Psalm 127? That our children shall be like olive plants growing up at our table. The idea there, olive plants or any plant has to be well grounded. It has to be rooted. As Paul tells us in Colossians, rooted and grounded in the faith. And so from a child, Timothy learned great things of God and about the Word of God. He was rooted and grounded, and he grew up and became a very strong and growing Christian. And that my sons never quit growing in the Lord. I want them to be well established. I want them to be good fathers. I want them to have good families. I want their wives to safely trust in them. All those different things. And then it's interesting what he says about daughters. Notice he says that our daughters may be as pillars sculptured in a palace style, or the word King James, that word pillars can be cornerstones. Now, when you think of a cornerstone, what do you think? Or a pillar, which is, of course, a support. You're saying that the men are strong and the women are the underpinnings of society. Think about it. The hand that was it, the foot that rocks the cradle rules the world. And so when you got men that are strong and are developing, and then they have wives and mothers they are blossomed because they have the security of a loving husband. You got a lot going on there. Will there be problems? Always are, because we're all sinners. But that's the ideal society. A society that has strong families. And that's what we want. And of course, that's exactly why the devil's trying to destroy this whole idea. We got this presidential candidate that says we're not going back to the 50s, where a man and a woman lived together all their lives. Women are liberated. They don't have to, well, there again, I don't mind, if we ever had somebody that wasn't, if we had a Margaret Thatcher or somebody that I would vote for a good, strong woman, but that's not what he's talking about here. By the way, Margaret Thatcher was a good mother too. So, she was, so there again, it's not that women can't be strong. After all, a pillar is pretty strong, isn't it? If it can hold up a lot of weight, a cornerstone is even stronger. So it's a whole foundational type of thing. Strong men. And I like the idea, like he says there, he says that the women, our daughters, may be sculptured, adorned. Beautiful women. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's a lot good with it. And so he says, that's what we want to see. My daughter, she knows they call it pet name, and her pet name, and she never really appreciated it until she got older, was, she put something on the internet the other day. It sure is good that whenever I'm down, all I got to do is call my dad, and he says, "Hi, beautiful," and it makes my whole day. There again, that's what we want. Now, do my daughter and I have problems? I mean, she's a sinner and I'm a sinner. But there again, it's the ideal, the things that we shoot for, the things that we honor, rather than the things that we will accept. So we always want to get better. And we see that he says that, then again, notice that our barns shall be filled with plenty. And there again, that's Proverbs 3:10. That's the phraseology there that Solomon comes up with. But he says, that's 3:10, but what does Proverbs 3:5 and 6 say? Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not into thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy paths. And you go on down, and he keeps telling you. And then verse 10 says, if you follow what God tells you to do, he'll let you direct his path, or you'll direct his path. If you will follow him and let him direct your path, then your barns will be filled with plenty. And there again, the blessings of a country. What the United States, what have we been known as for most of our history until recently? The land of plenty. Was there any consequence? But then again, on our very coins, it was what? In God we trust. But now what really surprises me is the things that are going on even in our political conventions. And now they have all kinds of people coming up and praying to their gods. It used to be when we said, when in God we trust, everybody pretty well knew what we were talking about. And so, again, we see a country that is becoming disunified because at least, and were all these people that David was working with, are they all in heaven because they're Israelites? Absolutely not. Israelites are saved just like we are today. By faith, Abraham believed God. And it was counted unto him for righteousness. So not all Israelites were saved because a lot of them didn't believe God. And they were serving Baal and Asheroth and all the rest. But those who did, and if there was a priority of those who did, and that was the force of the nation, the salt of the nation was going to be blessed in spite of the bad eggs. And so we see that he says, and then not only will the barns be full, but in verse 14, very interesting, he says that, it talks about the oxen also and so forth, but he says, there shall be no breaking in or going out, no raids on your property, on your borders, and then also peace and safety in the streets. Your kids can go out and play in the streets and not worry about somebody stealing them. Wouldn't that be pretty good? But that's the benefits of a nation that fears God. Why are we having so many problems today? We don't fear God. And as a result, even our kids suffer. But then notice, I like that last statement that he makes in verse 15. Happy are the people who are in such a state. Now, is he talking about a country or is he talking about a condition? Whatever he is, of course, he is saying happy are those people that are in that culture, whether it's a condition or the country itself. And he says, and I like the way that Wiersbe put it, he said, how blessed are the people whose God is the Lord, for he cares for us personally, delivers us victoriously, and blesses us bountifully. Isn't that what God does? He personally, Lord, what am I, Lord? And yet he chose me, amazing grace. So he chose me personally. He delivers me. He promised me I'll never leave him or forsake me. And he blesses me bountifully. We have a great God, don't we? Okay, any questions or comments about this great song? Anything going on? Okay, that was more than 40 minutes, right?
49.
Oh my, I went too long.
You were talking about how he looked.
Yeah.
It tells you in 1 Samuel 16,
He was ruddy.
when they went to anoint David to be the king, he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to.